Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is actually probably not going to be a part of the series. Maybe it will. We'll see how we go with feedback to this. But I got a request here from Mr. Gotchadot, or Mr. Dot. Just an idea. How about making a whole track with, how about mixing, sorry, I'm going to read, how about mixing a whole track with M-class devices only? M-class devices are the stock mixing units that come within the Reason environment. They get a certain amount of flack because they are transparent. In other words, they're not designed to be character devices. I think they're worth looking at. So, not sure about others, but I would find that very useful, even with rack extensions. I still like to use the M-Class series more than anything. Still enjoying these videos. Thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Dot. I said, thanks, Mr. Dot. I use the M-Class quite a lot. They do the job fairly transparently more often than not. Plus, if you want another sound, you can learn that on another device, then work out and match it adequately with M-Class. I've thought an awful about showing a whole mix, but while I'm happy making long videos, I worry that most people don't like it. Blah, 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 bit of backwards and forwards. And then I decided, yep, I'm going to have a go at it. Oh, and Mr. Dot did reply. YouTube isn't always good at telling me when I've had replies from people. So if it seems like a while between when you send me something and I respond, it may just be that I got no idea. I try and make a habit of looking every couple of days. So Mr. Dot, this one is for you. So we will start with, I can't use my my F456 or what have you, because the screen recorder is going to do all manner of things. We will start with some housekeeping. This is my mastering section. You will see that the compressor is off. You'll see the equalizer is off. You will see that the gain trimmer and mono is off. Now, there's nothing wrong with mixing fully in mono, but that's not going to help you hear me panning things, so we will keep that fella off. But we will test in mono. Whether I include the mastering in this video, I don't know. I'm going to see how long it goes for before I decide whether it stays. I have a maximizer. I have a limiter across the whole thing. I do not want anything happening in this whilst I'm mixing. If something's happening in this whilst I'm mixing, my mix is wrong. So I'm not looking to make my mix peak up here, definitely not up in the clip. I will be hoping that my mix is somewhere around here. Now, I don't spend my time looking and going, oh, where's it at? Where's my mix at? I think when you're doing that, you're probably still in a learning phase. And that's great if you're checking, that really is good. But once you've been at it a while, you know what's right and you know what's wrong. And that's from training. It's called muscle memory. So I don't expect my mix to be much more than about this, which means I've got plenty of headroom. It's always easy to turn up the volume, especially in digital, because turning up the volume is not going to change anything, it just makes it louder. You're not pulling up a noise floor or anything. So I will not be looking to mix into this limiter or compressor. To me, that is a very bad way of mixing. There are reasons that people give for it in dance music and what have you, and that's fine, but I still very much discourage it. If you're watching this, you're probably looking to learn something. If you're looking to learn something and you're pushing your way into a limiter as you're learning to mix, you're not learning balance. You're letting something else solve your problems for you before you even realize you've got them. So, my 2 cents on that. I can fold this up. I don't need to see it. Also, see that there is no master compressor on. There's no anything happening. What I have done when I was putting this piece together is that I've just trimmed some of the instruments as I'm working so that they sit evenly. Past that, I have done nothing at the instrument level to any of the instruments that you hear. Bit of a challenge for me at times, but each of these sounds is raw. So what you hear is going to be a lot like what I would hear if somebody sent me a piece they'd written without attempting to mix it. So let's see what we have got. Background. This piece is a set of variations upon the TV theme for Midsomer Murders. The first part of this piece, the bit that I'm not going to play you lest YouTube get upset and bent out of shape with me, is the original notes. It's wonderful work. If you haven't watched Midsomer Murders, not only is it a really cool show, it's not just for old people, it's a very cool, clever show. In the old school, cool and clever show thinking. But it's a really, really clever piece of music. It actually turns out that it's in 3/4 time. So the original piece is actually a waltz using a small orchestra and a theremin. I have made no attempt to duplicate the theremin because that to me would just be kind of tacky, thoughtless. My aim with what I've done here is to take some of the ideas in that original theme music and spread them out as though they were the incidental music that you would hear inside an episode. So if you're watching an episode of something that has a strong theme, thematically in the music, you will often hear variations and echoes of that theme through the whole show. Midsomer did it well. Foyle's War did it beautifully. The original Foyle's War theme and the variations that run through are good. Father Brian also does it really well. Star Wars, of course, does it really, really well. You hear elements of those themes all the way through. Every time there's Vader or Stormtroopers, bah, bah, bah. Okay, so let's start to dig in. Remember, I'm going to treat this somewhat like this is something that someone sent me. So the very first thing that I need to do is work out, what have I got? What have I got? Okay, so this gives me a sense of, if this has been sent across to me, this gives me a sense of what I've got. This is what I'm working with. It's really important. Work out what you're working with before you start working with it. What's the story of this piece of music? Okay, I've given you the background in this case, that it's coming out of a TV theme. It's variations upon. So it's not necessarily designed to be the most cohesive piece of music, but the bit you don't hear is kind of the TV theme straight, and these are ideas spun off of that. So we can hear that through that. At least I can. If you don't know the Midsomer thing, then do yourself a favour. Go have a listen to it. I may well also start to look at, well, what do my instruments sound like? That's the lead sound. I know that because I made it and I put it at the top, therefore it's the most important sound. When mixing, I will try to always follow the same formula. And you might go, oh, but formulas are boring, Benedict, they're for losers. You know, we're creative, we do wild, radical things every time. Okay, go for it. But if you're getting confused, use formulas. Formulas don't have to ruin your life. But I have some formulas, which means it's very easy for me to find things in my mix. Very easy for me to find things in my arrangement when I'm working on it. You know, this is reasonably small. It's a bit big for me because it's got lots of instruments compared to what I normally do. I'm normally reasonably minimal. But in a normal mix, I will have my drums and bass up top. Not because they're the most important things, but just because that's where they go. I will then commonly have things in the order in which I've composed them, because that kind of makes sense. So the first thing you hear is often up here. But if I feel the need to, I'll juggle things around so that they're in a logical order, And down the bottom, as we scroll down, or as we head over here on our mixer, these sounds tend to be more incidental. They may rattle through the mix, but they are less important, as in we could throw them away and our piece would still work. If we throw away our horn line, how much sense does our piece of music make right now? I got rid of the soprano as well because it's echoing it at this point. Once we get rid of it, the piece makes no sense at all. Matter of fact, it sounds out of tune and like a garbled mess, which is one of the very clever things that the original composer did. He makes this piece seem to stumble over itself, be very, very detailed and textured, including to be somewhat out of tune at times, with complex harmonies. And this weird, kooky alien feel to it. So, my point, again, is the most important instruments I try to put at the top, the more incidental ones towards the end. And even though soprano actually ends up carrying a lot of what's going on, I composed this line later, I added this line later, and it's not the dominant, because it's still this. So it's down there. You get to remember after a while. There's no particular rule other than to say, have some sense of organization, so you know where to find things, and you know that if you have to make some decisions to reduce the power of some things to make the mix work, you can be more fast and loose with losing these fellas than you can with these fellas. When working with a classical arrangement, which this essentially is. I mean, it's not classical music because it doesn't come out of the classical period, but it's orchestral music. When working with an orchestral or very composed and arranged score, which this is, each of these instruments carries a part. Not stunning on its own. If everything carries a part, as in we're not got 12 guitars all playing the same thing, then we also need to understand that. If you've got 12 guitars all playing the same thing, push comes to shove, 11 of those guitars can go in the bin. You don't tell a band that. But if push comes to shove and you don't have the space to make that mix really fire, to make the song fire, throw it in the bin. And I know people get bent out of shape about Metallica's And Justice for All. They go, oh, poor bass player, you can't hear him in the mix. Don't give a shit. That record is a really uncompromising mix. And I'm pretty confident, based on the things that I've heard where people have gone, oh, let's put that bass back in, that that record was not have done as well if Lars hadn't said, pull that bass back right out of the mix. It makes that mix really uncompromising. So if you've got to lose things, lose them. You may not tell the band that you lost them, but if it sounds stunning, that's what counts. This kind of mix, where we're working with a highly orchestrated mix, there's not a lot you can drop out. So you've got to have room for everything, lest things start to fall apart. So, my horn. At this moment, I'm just looking to understand where I've got in my mix. What's the texture of this sound? Cool. Short cellos. Okay, that's a pretty simple line. It doesn't do an awful lot, but it's stylistically a really important part of what happens in the piece. It's helping drive the rhythm of the piece. And I do know a couple of you may be going, how can this be a mix, Benedict? How can we learn anything from this because there are no drums? You'd be wrong. This is the equivalent of our drums here. Cello long. So it's very much a counter melody. It's a melody that doesn't really work on its own, but in combination with other parts, then it starts to work. Bass short. They're really the equivalent of cello short, so the pair of them probably just work together. Let's get them together. Here we go. Okay, so they're to a fair extent layers, and by putting the two together we're getting that sound. It's a grunty kind of sound, so cool. Bassoon, who doesn't love a bassoon? So let's see what this fella's doing. I see a little bit of melodic stuff, but there's also a lot of just the quirky little things that you do with an orchestra. To add character. English horn. English horn is here. Let's make sure we've got some of it. So it seems like it has the ability to take a lead or supporting role. Seeing our lead is not in the mix here, looks like it's stepping up and taking the lead. Sounds a little bit like a clarinet or something, fair enough. Violins. So we can see straightforward melodic stuff. We've got melody, stronger melody up here because there's more happening in the notes. So it's also supporting, which strings commonly are. Flute, where's our flute play? Well, he just looks like Spice. He's a supporting thing, he's just Spice. Trombone. He does a lot in the original arrangement, doesn't do so much here. So it doesn't do a lot, but obviously he has his role. Harpsichord. Who doesn't love a harpsichord? Now, as you may well have noticed when listening to the piece, overall, there is that feeling through it of being a little out of tune. And initially when you come into it, you might go, oh, that's just wrong. But it's deliberate, it's unsettling. And part of that is driven by this part, because it's playing minor seconds. So it's playing a lot of this through and playing with really tight, close harmonies, which is rather cool because it's part of what gives the whole piece its character. It's so quirky, and I don't know whether you notice, but I can notice when I mute that in the middle of playing, while the piece then seems to settle and become less ooh, it also becomes kind of dull. So that part, even though it's small and doesn't really do anything, it doesn't carry a melody or anything, it's constantly keeping you that little bit on edge to add that character. So it actually turns out to be a pretty important sound, even though it's very incidental. French horns. Again, a little bit of lead, but this is all very supporting stuff. Our soprano. I actually really like the Humana sample set that we got given, and I've used the soprano quite a few times. Not the most even sounds, but it's a really characterful sound. So there she's providing a counterpoint and bringing out some of the elements that was in the original piece otherwise brought out through the theremin. I was not going to do theremin. I'm not a master of trying to sound like a theremin. It's easy to pretend you're making a theremin sound, but it's very hard to play a theremin unless you know how to play a theremin. And if you don't know how to play a theremin well, leave it the hell alone. So she's a supporting part, but a really strong part of character. So it's, if we kill her, somewhat like having a curry with no curry. So she's important. And then we've got a trumpet line here. Clearly just supporting stuff. So he's not a lead. We've got our generically named horn up top doing that. So if you've built your own piece from scratch and are getting to the stage where you go, oh, now I need to make a final mix, you probably don't need to go through that stage. However, if you're still kind of learning to get better at mixing, it's well worth writing your piece, putting it aside for a day or so, coming back in and running through the parts so you're understanding what's their role in this piece. Now please, again, if you're coming into this and going through your sounds and you look at the drums and you go, well, these are the most important part of the mix, I think you've got it wrong. I think that's why your mixes are struggling and your pieces aren't getting a lot of presence in the market, so to speak. Because even though drums can be important, melody. It doesn't have to be an overt melody, but there has to be something, because every idiot can press play on a 909. So how are you different? It's what you do on top of your 909 that makes you different. So when you come in and run through what's there, even if it's a piece of slammin' techno, yes, the drums are important in that. More important than in here, obviously, because I don't have any. But what's happening on top of that makes that piece unique over every other piece that goes look for the unique. In this case, unique is in our lead. We've also got some uniqueness in this harpsichord line that just makes us feel slightly queasy, and the soprano that adds this real spice to the whole piece when she comes in. The other supporting parts, there are quite a few of them, especially for what I normally do, and the way they work together creates that complex, interesting sound. So what do we do with them? This is what I would call a first mix. If somebody sent me this piece and said, Benedict, I've written this, I want you to mix it, this would probably be the first thing they got back. Because often what I would get, they played with or something or other. So my first mix would be to look to get everything up. We've got nothing too loud. I don't want to see, when I'm starting to mix, I don't want to see things, levels up here, levels up here. If I've got levels up here, where have I got to go? I feel like Bohemian Rhapsody, the song, if it started with the headbanging bit, where's the song going to go? Nowhere. It's going to go downhill. It can't get bigger than that. That's you've got all this stuff, and then suddenly, that's the real high point. The same with Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight. We go through that great big build-up of tension, and then suddenly hop in our gorilla suit, which is kind of embarrassing for that song because it's such a powerful, dark and great song that came down to a gorilla suit in the end. But nonetheless, let's not start with our mix having things right up high. You'll also notice my faders are all at 0. When we finish this, it's entirely possible my faders will still be at 0. And you think, well, what have you done? What do you care? If you're looking for your mixer to move faders, then that looks pretty cool. Great, wonderful mix. There you go, send it off, we'll master that fucker. And you're probably going, Benedict, you're being a dick. Yep, because if you're saying that mixing is about making your mixer look a certain way, then you're lost. Mixing is about finding the balance that shows off the story of the piece. So the original composer of this piece, so I'm not going to play you so I don't upset YouTube, wanted to tell a story. He did it really well. Go watch it on YouTube, it's out there. Did a brilliant job. My story is to take his story, create things that are related to that, as though I was scoring the rest of the episode, which is quite common. Not at all uncommon that one dude scores the main theme and someone else scores the bulk of the episode. You take the original composer's musical language, his story, and you work within it. So here, mixing is about expressing the story that all of these parts are giving us. So we've gone through them to get a sense of what each of these people add to the story, and then we've got to work out how to balance them. Now, I think they balance really nicely already. You may think otherwise, but I think they balance fairly nicely already. It's inevitable when you write that you're going to feel like they've balanced fairly well. But I'm going to turn this on. This is one of the first things that I do once I've got a sense of feeling like, okay, this balances fairly nicely. I'm now going to go through and look at each of my sounds. Notice I do not solo them. I soloed to work out what each instrument is doing. If you've written it, then you probably don't need to do that, but I'm working on the assumption I didn't write this, that I got sent this, in which case I want to learn what they are. Now, I'll quite commonly apply one of these fellas. You want to find out where the lowest notes are that this instrument plays. So it doesn't play real low. In some ways we could possibly pass this for this instrument. We could skip this, because this instrument isn't throwing off anything down here at all. It's a very neat and tidy instrument. It's not creating mush underneath. It'd be tempting to solo this instrument. Let's just, I will do it here on the MIDI. I would normally do it on the MIDI, but we'll do it on the MIDI. And go. Bitchin'. Working on the assumption I've made that sound as exciting as I can in situ, in solo. When we drop this back in the mix, have we improved it? In this case, I may have, but all too often, if you wade in and put things in solo and then start improving them on their own, you'll start with your bass and your drums, or probably your drums first, and you'll wind the bass up on those till they're... How have you got any room left to make a mix? Remember, a mix is a balance of all the elements. So if you've made your drums, particularly your kick drum and everything, if you've done this, and this is all full, and this is all full, and this is all full, where are you going to put everything else? So please do not make the rookie error of soloing things. Soloing things is only to find out what's wrong, or to see what it would sound like if you got rid of them, to see how important that element of your arrangement is. So, now with your stock device in here, is you've got two modes. So they can have a constant bandwidth, which is narrow, or they start with the default, which changes. So you see the bandwidth actually gets narrow as you go higher. Now these are good for subtle tone changes. So you can say, okay, I kind of want to tilt it a bit high here or a bit low here. It's broad tonal changes. It's very smooth. But if you want to get surgical, then you make it the same. See, that stays the same all the way through. You can, of course, narrow them right down as well. But you use that to go through and find Now the next thing that I see a lot of in online tutorials is they say the first thing is you do is you find bad frequencies. Well, you know, these certain frequencies, member of Hell's Angels, go around shooting up shopping centres for fun. No, not at all. There are no bad frequencies, not at all. Maybe if you are mixing a drum kit and there's a resonance that's coming in from somewhere, so something's whining, we might call that bad. But it's the whine that's bad, it's not the frequency. Really important, there are no bad frequencies. I saw a picture online just a day or so ago where it showed a spectrum view like this, and somebody had gone through and they'd notched out every single one of these lines. If there was a vertical line, they'd notched it. Are you insane? completely insane, because each one of those is your overtone series. They're your sound. So if you want to chop out every part of your sound, you've either completely got the wrong sound in the first place, use a sine wave, you fool, or turn the volume down. That person probably felt very producery, because they're like, oh, I'm doing so much work. Just being an idiot. If your whole sound is too loud, turn it down. If you don't like the character of your sound, get rid of it. Swap it. If you've been involved with this mix from before now, you shouldn't let the sound get that far. Sure, if somebody else has sent you this mix, and you've got that sound and you're going, oh my god, what were these people drinking? Fine, but you would not go through with like 50 million nodes chopping out millions of frequencies. You would simply be looking at either a broad tonal adjustment or a surgical job. Now, a lot of people would say, well, they're the loud frequencies, so you want to get rid of them. You'll see that I'm actually liking boosting them. Bear in mind, I'm listening through these headphones. I really don't feel comfortable with. But I did put some time into referencing them a tiny bit, listening to some of my other music and listening to some Boz gags, nicely recorded stuff, to get some sense of how they work a little bit better to do this. But what I hear here there are some really warm, brassy sounds in there. I like that, so I'm going to boost that. I have boosted some air here. I'm just looking for some air. Air is the stuff that happens kind of past where we're normally listening to. There are no particular frequencies, but anything sort of past 3 or 4K is probably getting up into air frequencies. Because you don't sing up there. No instrument actually has a fundamental up there. So what you're hearing is kind of the air, the room around this. So we might brighten those up. I'm prepared to push a little harder on this instrument because this is essentially the lead instrument. In this case, I muted the soprano. Soprano naturally has a lot of air and we're going to want to give her air, but her air was fighting with this air at the moment, so I just wanted to hear, well, okay, how far can I go? But I'll still listen to it in context. I like it. Now, I've done some work there, so I might well be wanting to have a look at this instrument. What's happening with this instrument? What's it up to? I'm going to solo this guy. Excuse me, we'll go back and loop here. Loop. Just so I don't run out of. Now I know that what I'm doing at the moment sounds awful and it's distorting and just looking for that point where this breathes nicely. The overall sound has to breathe nicely, and that's related to the phrasing of the musical line as well as just the individual sound. The only time you've ever got individual sounds on their own is possibly if you've got a kick drum or a snare drum. Generally there is a phrase. Even there's a phrase because it's whatever. So you might set it so it sounds great there, but when it's going it sounds terrible. So you've got to balance, unless you're going to compress, sample it off and then fly it back in, but it's not going to sound the same. So we've got to the reason I've added a compressor here is because when we were back looking at our thing here, I boosted what's already a pretty lively frequency. There are peaks up here. So I want to boost them. I want to hear a bit more of that sort of MIDI, brassy sound. Mid-frequency, not MIDI as in musical instrument digital interface. I wanted to hear that mid-frequency. That's a real warmth in there. But by boosting it, I can make it a little bit more excitable, hence the compressor. The other possible option that I would have considered here is a dynamic EQ, which is an EQ that would actually turn itself down based upon frequencies and levels and what have you. But the request was to do it with M-Class, and there's absolutely no reason you can't do everything you need to do with M-Class. So that's just given me a little bit more control over that sound and some of its dynamics, seeing I've pushed some of them. My next bits are my cellos. So where do I have my cellos? Oh, my cello short and my bass short working together. Here. Let's unmute this. Sorry, it's hard when I've got no ability to see all my things at once. So these instruments commonly work together. So because of that, I may just move cello long aside, cello long, you can go there, just so I've got my two shorts together. New output bass, new output bass, whoop, clearly not working very well. Let's try that again. New output bass, send it to bus 1. I'll just call it bass so it's easy to find. So I've sent those two fellas to one place. Okay, so give them a little bit of whoop, because I don't really need to worry about bass guitars, synth basses, drums. So these are the lowest parts of the mix, so they can afford to have a little bit more woof. The air in the bottom of the mix is allowed to, even though there's not a lot happening down here, I'm actually not going to cut it off. If I had drums and traditional electric basses, synth basses or what have you, living in this space here, then I would probably be doing this. And you go, but you know, they've got so much power. Yes, they do. But if the story in your mix is driven by your electric bass, your synth bass, we'll assume they're the same thing, then is the mix really driven by your double bass and your cello? Entirely probable that they're more of a mid-range sound, that they're more of a sweetener. But this, there's nothing there, so I don't plan on cutting anything off there. Let that extra wally be there for those people who have subs. We'll see if I want to compress it. I may or I may not. I just want to see what's going on. I feel like I'm hearing it tighten just a little bit. I don't want to change it too much. This is essentially an orchestral mix. If you go treating all your orchestral instruments as though they were synths or electric instruments, your mix is not going to sound orchestral anymore. It's going to sound wrong. I'm putting in this kind of effort because the question was they wanted to see work through a whole mix. If this was purely me, it's entirely probable I would have just bussed this whole lot, every single thing in here, with the possible exception of the soprano. I probably would have bussed them to one bus and then put them through some kind of saturation. Pull them into a room and then reverberate them, just like a real orchestra. But I feel like it gives a little bit more punch, so I'm happy to go with that. Cello long. See here, there's stuff down here. It's not actually being used because we've got a bass playing in that range. We might again look and go to ourselves, okay, where is this lowest in the mix? I think it's right here, there. So at that point it seems like it may step into a bass roll. Not really. It's supporting the bass, so I'm still happy to let the bass lead the charge at that point. But we've got our melodic parts. This is a supporting part. I don't want it to get too excitable, but I've given a little bit of boost here because it actually is bringing out some of the brassy sound. I love brass. I think that sounds nice. So I'm not going to do anything more with this fella right now. I think we're done there. Basses we've handled, so let's just drag him down there. Bassoon, he was a supporting part. So his role is to a great extent this little arpeggio. So I've EQ'd just to boost that. That's what he's primarily there to do. English horn. Where's he playing? Here. I solo there, that you might have seen me done it the last couple of times. I'm soloing not to hear the instrument on its own, merely to identify it. I've got a busy mix. I want to be able to identify this is what I'm listening to. So that's the thing I'm looking for. My brain is going to try and attune to that sound. So give myself a sample of that sound so that I can sort of follow it in the mix. So that's brought that little sound forward. It kind of sounds like a flute in the mix. You know, it's not because there's no flute, but it sounds a little bit fluty, and that was where it started to come forward. Brilliant. Happy with that. Actually, I might give them a tiny bit of air. There we go. Violins. Now I know that I've got in this area, my main horn, my main lead, I've boosted a little bit. I just want to pull that back a little bit. I don't want my violins to be sounding like the horns as well. They actually boost the horns, so I don't want to pull that back out. I want the synergy of the violins and the horns together. But I also want to allow that horn to have a little bit more space, and I know it's somewhere around here. I can be pedantic and go back up and go, okay, well that was at 560. Go back to my stringses. 430 is a little lower, but I've also boosted the bassoon just a little below that. So somewhere in that area, I've made just that tiny bit of space for the horn and the bassoon, because the horn's the lead. The bassoon has a tiny role, but it's actually quite important. You listen to the original recording for the show, and I don't exactly know what instrument it is, but it's what I've defined as a bassoon here. That little arpeggio is actually quite important in the way the whole thing comes together. So violins, now the violins do something. Okay, that, in theory, this should have been done before I got it. Thank you, Facebook. But it's not, and that's okay. Part of your job when you're mixing is to look at the whole story. Now this, we've got the components. So where does this piece belong? That there, where does it belong? belongs a little to both, but I'm going to say it belongs more to this than it does to that. This is finished. This is just a little bridge. So let this be something that fades in. So it needs a little bit of control given to it. So I will go into my master, volume, and I'm going to create a curve. Now I know these NNXTs have a strange volume curve, like here. You can turn the volume down a lot here and nothing happens. So I'll go relatively aggressively. But I'll also go back up here because I don't want that sound to get chopped off. If I just leave that down here, this sound will come along here and chopped off. So let's see what we've got. Don't love it. I want that volume swell feel. Okay, now in an ideal world, the composer would have done that. That would be in the score instructions, and it would have been played like that, because doing volume changes like that to a string section after the fact, kind of like doing volume pedal rockers to guitars after the fact, is not the same as doing it at the time. However, this composer was lazy and didn't do it. Actually, no, the truth is, I didn't do it so that I could show you me doing it here. And I'm not digging a hole upwards. I actually saw that, felt that straight away. It's like, but I thought I'm going to hold that to show you, here's a little mix element. I hear that this doesn't sit as nicely as it should, so I will add in what's really a performance thing, but I'll add that in to shape the piece. As a mixer, your job is to show off the song. Again, I'm really pushing that. And that was a little inelegant. We can show off the flow of the song, the piece, a little bit better by shaping. So violins. Now normally, this is an hour, I would normally go have a drink of water if I hadn't already by now. But you don't want to see me go have drinks of water, so I'm not going to. I will persevere. Flute. As expected, it's doing stuff in the low end, which really has no purpose in life. It's a minor sound. I'm not that worried. That is going to do the job. Trombone. I know most of it's happening over there, but I'm not going over there, so we'll work with what we got here. to bass instruments, so we want to see how low do you go. Of course those notes get muted, doesn't really matter, we're working with what we see here. That's as low as we go, so... I want to keep it warm. It's got a bit happening here, sort of a raspy, brighter sound, but in my world with this trombone, I want it to be warmer. So I've boosted some here, which again is in that low brassy range. Actually, it's quite a bit lower. So I'm looking for, real mids, just to give it belly. There's something lovely about a trombone and the belly that it brings. So as a result, I'm leaving its air, but I'm getting rid of some of the sort of higher mids, just because I don't want it to be that harsher sound coming through the mix. They're just a supporting part. Now the harpsichord. Harpsichord's working here too. Just giving it a tiny bit of air. I boosted that trombone somewhere around the 300, so I'm pulling this back a little bit. Now I'm wondering if that hasn't reduced some of the drunkenness breaks. No, I'm happy enough with that still. French horn. French horn doesn't do an awful lot. It's kind of harsh a bit there. There. I've just pulled some of that out because we've got a bit already happening around there, and it's just... it feels kind of hard, at least in this situation it feels kind of hard there. So just taking a bit off. Now you notice I'm not taking this off. I'm just moving a little bit, because I tend not to put sounds into a mix that I don't think belong there in the first place. Again, if somebody has sent you something and you go, oh my god, then get aggressive. And there's nothing wrong, there's no law that says that you shouldn't do this kind of stuff. But if you've used the right instruments in the first place, you shouldn't need to be doing that stuff. If you're doing it regularly, then you're probably overdoing it and you're not quite using the right sounds in the first place. I know in some situations, and this is more of a classical mix or orchestral mix, so we don't want anything to be overblown. It's about hearing the lines. And yes, if we're working in a dance mix or something like that, yeah, you're going to want to get a bit aggressive. And the more aggressive your sounds in your mix are, the more aggressive you will get. But see how even small, that's what, 2 dB move? A 2 dB move can be enough to just really alter the feel of something. And that's all you're doing. And what I'm doing here is I'm not looking to adjust the volume of any of my sounds. You might have noticed that now. Right now I'm not moving the volume of any sounds. And I think it's entirely probable I'll get to the end of this and not change any of them. Other than that bit there where I needed to automate something to change the feel or the flow of the track. I'm just sculpting the tonal balance of each instrument and how they sit in the mix. And now it's entirely possible to do a whole mix, as I think I'm going to achieve here, without changing a single volume fader. Now, some of that, I will admit again, came because as I was mixing it was just like, oh yeah, that soprano is way too loud, I'm going to hack 6 dB off her. But it is also possible that I'll get to the end of this and go, yeah, but I feel like I want to push that a little bit more. Sometimes that's the next morning, or I've listened to it in the lounge, on the sub after I've finished watching TV, so my brain's had a whole lot of other gelato go through to clear it, and I'll have a listen, and it's a far from accurate system, and the sub's on, and the mids are all gone, and then I'm going to see how I feel about it. And I might go, yeah, but I feel like I've lost the impact of the violins or something like that. Then I'll come in tomorrow and make the adjustment based upon what I hear or don't hear. But don't feel like you have to make mixes by playing with faders. I made a real point of that and really pushed that before, but again, it's entirely probable I'm not going to touch a fader here, because we can make so much of this mix, or if not all of this mix, by doing nothing but adjust the tone of each of the parts of it. Soprano, now remember, she is a major player in this game. Matter of fact, I'm going to come back to her. I'm going to skip to the trumpet because he's a bit player. Now, he's probably my least favourite sound in the whole mix. I love trumpets, really do. Not as good as a flugelhorn, but still, trumpet's a thing to behold. You know, got Dick Morrissey playing one or whatever, beautiful thing. This is not a beautiful sample, but it's the one I've got. I'm not going to fight it. It's just stupid. You know, I could get all bent out of shape and say I've got to spend $5 million buying the most ubiquitous, contact trumpet sample because this one's ruining my life, or I can just get over it and move forward, because the reality is, as long as it plays an adequate role in the mix without really standing out, and it only stands out to me, I bet it doesn't stand out to you, and even if it stands out to you with your pedantic hat on, to an ordinary person who listens to this, they're either not going to realise there's a trumpet there at all, they just go, oh, there's an orchestra, or they're just going to go, oh yeah, there's a trumpet line. So why get bent out of shape over what no one else is going to get bent out of shape over? So important, keep myself moving, even though I don't love this sound. So what I don't like is it's a bit too toppy, tinny. So just added a little bit of warmth. Don't want to do too much of that because there's still not a lot of love in that sound, but I'm just letting the line come through. It's there for a reason. It adds a little bit of spark at that point. Let's let it do its job. Cool. So, soprano. I've left her to last because, as I've said before, she's actually a super important part of this mix. She really is. So, There, we've got a tiny bit more vibrance from her. It's a less than perfect sample set, but it's a characterful sample set, and that's what wins me every time whenever I hit this one, that I put it in and it's just like, wow, how good is that? So I play to its strengths and I ignore its weaknesses. Like as we go from note to note, it changes tone. I, again, like my trumpet, could get all pedantic and say, oh no, I have to run through every vocal sound set ever released until I get the perfect one. But I bet you I'm not going to find another sound set, unless I buy the same thing, that has that character. In which case, she sounds great. She actually sounds very much like a sample. She sounds quite a lot like a synthesizer, which I love. It fits in. So I've got two sounds. Remember, the original version of this was a waltz for a small orchestra and theremin. You say that straight classical composers don't have a sense of humour. Of course they bloody well do. That's really very funny. I wasn't going to put a theremin in, as I said very deliberately, but I've got two synth sounds in here. The horn. It is based on a sample, but it's coming through Parsec. So it's still got a sampley feel, but it's got a synthy feel. And I've pushed that. And, well, the harpsichord, that's a very warm harpsichord, but I was brought up with my dad building harpsichords, and they didn't sound like those ghastly brittle French things. They were really warm. It wasn't a harpsichord in the original mix, it was actually piano, but as working through sounds, I got one of the orchestral samples, and as you know, between that and the piano where I first started, I thought, no, this is the wrong sound, and I tried things like guitars and what have you, but they all ended up saying to me harpsichord. So I made a synth sound in situ that, broadly speaking, we could say was a harpsichord, a nice warm harpsichord, something like a leather plectrum rather than a hog's bristle. Beautiful sound, a thing that most people don't realise exists, which is a crying shame. So our soprano, to some extent our harpsichord, and our horn are synths, and somewhat unashamedly so. Not quite so much on the horn. The rest are samples, and using orchestra, which is the stock stuff that comes with Propellerhead's Reason. It's a very neat and tidy library, but it's not the equal of Albion One or Studio Strings or any of those. But it was free. I've got it. I'm not in a position to go buy one of those other libraries, and when I do, I don't want to just go out and buy East-West that everybody has. I want to buy the kooky ones, the unusual ones, the ones that not everybody is using. And so that's going to cost me a couple of coins. I'll wait my time. In the meantime, I'll use synths because I adore synths. If you don't, that's your thing. Do whatever you want to do. So, mix-wise, what have I got? I don't need to look at this, not with the master section, but I'm showing it to you because you might want to see it. Pretty even. I'm happy with the sound overall. Now there's a couple of things we have not done. And you may think, Beads, Benedict, why didn't you do that before? You should have done that first. Don't think so. Don't think I needed to at all. And that is, we might want to pan some things. So that's in the center, that's our basses are in the center. Cello long. I'm just going to try. Bassoon, which I believe is spelled wrong. English horn's kind of like a flute, so let's try popping them over there. Violins I'm going to leave in the centre for the moment. Trombone, harpsichord, he's whimsical. French horn, soprano, trumpet. What have I got now? Again, I'm working in headphones, so I don't know how that's going to sound out on speakers. I'm going to put my speakers on because I did it last time I made a video and it sounded terrible. But what I'm looking to do there is just to spread the elements out a little bit. Now I could do this one of two ways. I could get myself a map of an orchestra and then say, well, that's where those instruments go, so that's what I'm going to do. But this is not trying to really emulate an orchestra. I might be using samples, but I'm not trying to emulate an orchestra. So what I'm going to think to do is to say, well, what role do these parts play? If I've moved one thing to one side, do I want the same, do I want its complementary part? Like if I've got counter melody A, do I want counter melody B on the other side? Or do they work better when they're both together? Violins, I really thought, as you heard, were going to sound best in the middle. But I found when I moved them out slightly, and it's not a lot, but when you move them off slightly, sometimes they really give you a better sound stage. Because I've moved my violins a little over to one side, I thought I might move my basses over a little to another. Now if you're watching, hopefully you're watching, you see I tried the idea of stereoifying them, didn't really love it. So I just moved them over slightly. Interestingly, that's where they sit. I have some concerns about the bass line here. it's kind of busy, maybe a little intrusive. So I'm going to try, and this is where what's called mix automation. In this section, I'm just going to try knocking a bit off it. And it turns out it ain't that bass. So, delete track. Let's look at Mr. Bassoon. You, sir, are a bassoon. Sorry, Simpson joke. And I realise I would be better off doing it from here. And this is how I don't end up using my faders. It's good to do your volume automation before your first note. You don't want your first note to start and then suddenly get turned down because you've got a blip. And then you need to leave it a little bit after just to cover off. Doesn't need a lot. Again, I'd question that because I'm in headphones, but let's just pull that back a little bit. Let's see how we go here. Okay, what I've realised is that as I've done a little boost there, remember I put a boost where it does most of its working, is playing most of its notes, that's effectively made that sound louder. So I've gone in and I've pulled it back. Again, could have pulled it back here, but I try and leave my faders completely untouched till the last minute if I decide, oh, I want to fade. Then that fade is completely outside of anything else that's happening. So now I'll go check this again. Yep, that's good. It wants to have a little bit of poke there because it's jaunty, but it just doesn't want to be, poking you in the face. Otherwise, I think everything else is okay. Alright, now the next thing here that I have not done is that this is a dry mix. There is no effects. Not a whit. Not a single sausage. Traditionally we would work on having a send. So I would assign. I think what's going to happen here is I'm going to assign the same amount of send to absolutely everything. Commonly in a mix we would say, the drums, I'm going to only send a small amount to the room reverb, to the shared reverb, but the strings I'm going to send a lot to. Reason being is you're probably wanting those drums and your bass to sort of stay forward. If you put a lot of reverb around them, they kind of get mushy and disappear. Whereas your violins, if they're big pad type sounds, you want to pull them back so that they're underneath the more detailed happening parts of the mix. So that'd be pretty standard sort of thinking. Soprano we might want to push a little more on, but at the moment she's completely dry as well. So that'll be the normal thinking. And then if necessary, we change our mix here to have more or less overall reverb. But as I said to you earlier, if I had gone and mixed this thing in one go as I finished my composing, I'm going to mix it now, I would have put everything bar probably the horn and the soprano into a bus. But I'm thinking now, I might just put the whole damn lot into this bus. So, I don't want to compress my reverb. I'm not looking to master. I'm going to do master another time. This is a long enough video already. So I'll make another video. I'm putting it into the masters because that's just my bus. I'm not going to go to the trouble of making a whole other bus on my mixer just to do this. God has already invented me a bus. He's called it the master bus. Here, by turning the mod amount up, oops, bit hard. Whereas if we turn the mod amount up, nice. Seeing it's a reverb going across everything, I don't see a lot of advantage in putting too much in the way of pre-delay. But I do probably want a fairly large sound. The other thing I'm not a massive fan of is the damping. Nice and bright. Yes, I am deliberately working only listening to the reverb. I'm listening to make the kind of reverb that I want. You can all do it different ways, but this is the reverb that I want. I want to turn on the EQ and change that a little. We don't want too much happening in the low end of this because it's just going to kludge up our mix. And where we have allowed a couple of instruments to have breathing room in the bottom end, like air, so to speak, in the bottom end, we don't want to kludge that up. Let those come through fairly naturally for people who have subs. Don't kludge it up or you'll make mud. We can look at I do like that sound. I went pretty hard, obviously. I'm looking to hear a tone, a type, a feel, a shiny, a not shiny, a warm, a brassy, or I'm looking for a descriptive tone in here, and I liked that. So I tried a few different places. That gave a really nice tone. So let's pull this back. That's really pulled that soprano forward big time. I would say I really like that. Let's have a little bit of Again, bearing in mind I'm in cans at the moment, so cans are a great way to get your reverbs and spaces horrifically wrong. If I were using speakers, I may be setting something different, but based on past experience and the bit that I'm learning about these cans, I think I have that about right. I believe that I've got a nice mix of this piece. I've deliberately not tried to be creative, other than fixing my composer's gaffe here, where he had not paced his piece properly. Lazy bastard. I've focused on finding the right tone to let these basically balanced instruments balance up just that little bit nicer. I'm not setting about trying to impose another vision on this. I know this is my piece, it's like, but I'm not trying to say, oh, let's turn this into something else. I know that's a big thing amongst a lot of people. It's like, oh, well, you take something that's crap and you fix it in the mix. I think it's a wrong idea. It means your piece is wrong in the first place, or you've taken a good piece and now you want to destroy it so that you feel more cool. You know, shoot bottles in your backyard when you feel that way. Don't mix. Definitely don't mix your own work. If you've made a nice melody and now you need to destroy it in the mix, you're going the wrong way, and that's why your mixes don't work out. So my mix here has been, yes, basically everything was reasonably well balanced. I've changed tone. I've brought out the tone in the instruments. I've worked more on bringing out the character of each of these parts of my arrangement. A couple of places I've sort of gone, yeah, let's just de-emphasize a little bit of that. But it's not my aim to go saying, you're a bad frequency, you don't belong in here. No, no. It's not the right way of doing it, because it went in there for a reason. So there are things in that instrument that belong in there. Let's just make the most of, you know, put a shiny on the bits that really make the mix work better, make the story work better. I have not mastered it, but I have put a reverb across the whole bass, which happens to be the master's, because we're still seeing this as though it were happening in one room. We've got a group of musicians and they're playing this cool, kooky pace in the one room. So I'm whacking it through one reverb. Quite a bit of reverb too, but that helps pull everything together. Done a little bit of panning, whether it's right, not 100% sure, but I don't want to go too aggressive. This is not Tipton and Downing in front of Judas Priest, you know, playing guitar here and guitar there. This is kind of subtle soundstage. If you're listening to an orchestra, you're not hearing lots of wide pan. You're hearing some of that from the room, but if you're sitting in the middle of the audience, your pan is kind of like this. Let's get those hands in the middle there. It's kind of narrow, so you'll see my pans were kind of narrow. And that's about it. I will go away, I'll have a listen to this, I will come back tomorrow maybe, and I'll decide if I like it, if I want to adjust it, and then I will look at finalizing or mastering. Thank you very much.